Greetings, everybody. I am back. Greetings to all the brethren. So happy to be making a video again. Man, where do I begin? So I'm not going to go too much into the personal level because that's not what this video is about. I'll do that later. But basically, I had a great summer. I did a lot of stuff. I saw some friends, kept very active, and it was awesome. I had a great time. Got a little sleep deprived towards the end, and that created some weird cycles that I'm still kind of dealing with. But the purpose of this video is, so this is what's happened to me recently, the last few weeks really. So check this out. So at the end of the summer, I went to the beach a couple times. I did a bunch of stuff, saw some good friends. Was pretty sleep deprived, and some stuff in my personal life was just off, kind of just ordinary stuff, nothing too new or dramatic. But it caused me to start struggling with some things, and I had some issues with kind of like addictions or habits or things that I was trying to change, and I was trying to change it. It wasn't really changing, and I was like, what's going on here? I started struggling with it a little bit. Nothing too extreme, but enough that it was kind of bothering me a little, and I was like, what's going on here? I keep trying to do this. It's not working, and I was like, and so I kept trying to do it, and it was like something was off, and but what it caused me to do is I started to think a bit about, what is the nature of like addictions and powerlessness and and I started to look around and I was like, man, it kind of seems like our whole society is being affected by this. And I just started pondering it deeply, And as I started pondering it, suddenly I started to realize some stuff about it that I had never realized before. I was like, oh man, because, since I got sober, or excuse me, so funny I said that. Since I was saved, I hadn't really thought that much about the issue. I had thought about it a bit, but then I really started pondering it. And I was like, what is addiction really? I was like, why is it getting worse throughout our whole society? And then I looked at like some stuff about Generation Z, people that are like 25 or below or whatever. And I was like, wow, dude, they're going through crazy mental health stuff. Their levels of addictions to everything is like nuts, And so I started being like, how is that possible? Like, what's going on, And then I listened to some of their music and I was like, wow, it's so depressing. It's bleak, And then I looked around the world and I was like, dude, it kind of seems like almost everyone has some kind of addiction now. I was like, dude, isn't it like just being on your phone all the time? I even looked at myself. I was like, during the periods when I was like, addicted to such and such thing or this or that, there was that. But then the periods when I didn't do that thing at all, if I really look at what happened, all that really happened was I just kind of seemed to switch to other things that like, you probably shouldn't really do this that much, but, just like watch YouTube videos and you're like, I should go do something. And then you're like, oh, I'll just watch another video. And I was kind of like, what is this underlying process? It's really like doing stuff that you don't really want to do, but you keep doing it anyway. And I was like, I started thinking about it more and more. And something just clicked in my mind. And I started like realizing all this stuff about it. I was like, because I saw stuff didn't make sense. I'm like, dude, how is it that like, if this is some problem certain people have, why is it that suddenly everyone has it? Like, how's there a whole generation where like suddenly they all have it? I was like, how could it like double if it was like certain genes? Suddenly one generation comes and now it's like doubled, tripled. It's like the genes didn't just double or triple, right? It doesn't make sense. And I was like, and then I started noticing that even people who like, that I had like known for a long time who never had like any addiction issue, I started noticing, it kind of seems like they're I was like, dude, it kind of seems like it's happening to everyone in society. Almost like maybe it's not even a personal thing. And I looked around and I was like, started to think of the whole thing kind of differently. And I just started to have some insights about it. And I was like, what if it's not what we think it is, And I started thinking about it more. And I was like, that makes sense. And I started reading about different concepts. I started thinking back about stuff I had known before. And then I was like, it's getting so much worse in our society. Could our society be doing something that's making it worse? Thinking about it more and more. And then I was like, wait a minute, started to realize how much belief seems to really affect it. And then I was like, oh, wait. And I was like, wait a minute. If you wanted to increase it, what would you do? You could do this. And I was like, wait, dude, look what our society does. So anyway, I had all these insights about it. So I started writing down stuff, dude. I'm like filling up all these notebooks and stuff. And I was like, oh man, this is going to make some great videos. Once I get it together and I just start sleeping at the same time and, I sort of like, get everything stabilized, I'll definitely do, the videos then. Of course, meantime, I should just kind of get it together first. And a little time went by. And then one day, suddenly, I think I just looked at my phone and there was like messages from like 3 people all at once that all said, 3 different people all saying kind of the same thing. People I knew from, the group, the Inner group, they're like, yeah, I'm kind of struggling with this like addiction, and all of a sudden it's kind of bothering me, and I don't know what's up. I feel kind of bad about it. And then I saw another one like, yeah, I have this weird problem, suddenly this, and all of a sudden it was like God didn't literally speak to me in that moment, but suddenly I realized that God was showing me something there. I was like, wait a minute, it seems like I'm not the only one going through this, because what they're describing is like the same thing that happened to me, So I asked some other people about it. Quickly, I discovered, I was like, wait a minute, almost everybody suddenly says they're going through something like this. It's almost as if everybody's willpower or life force has suddenly kind of weakened, and it's kind of causing these weird problems where you're like kind of getting stuck in certain things in a way that just kind of almost happened out of nowhere. So then when I realized that, I was like, wait a minute, I just had all these weird insights that came out of nowhere, and I kind of knew God was like showing me something, because the insights were it's stuff I've been thinking about my whole life. I've had so much experience, going to AA and then seeing it this way and that I was like, suddenly it was like each day I was like, oh my God, could this actually be this? And I was like, dude, it all makes sense. And then I thought, after that day when everybody messaged me, I was like, dude, it's like God wants me to talk about it now. It's like he's saying, Evan, you're not alone in this. Look at what's happening all around you. And I was like, maybe he showed me that stuff because he wants me to tell people about it and just share it. And maybe it'll be useful to someone, or we can figure it out together or something. So then I was like, okay, cool. Well, I have all this material. I'm going to make videos about it. It's going to be fun. I was like, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to go have this one about this and this one about this. But then for like the last 2 weeks, I've had the experience that each day I'm like, all right, I'm going to make the video today. Here we go. I'm going to do this. And then when I would go to make the video, something weird would happen that would like stop me. And I'd be like, well, okay. I guess I'll have to do it tomorrow, And then like tomorrow, the next day, the same thing would happen. Like suddenly I'd get this terrible headache. Like I'd feel fine. And then right before I did the video, I'd be like, let's do it. I'd be like, oh God, I have this headache, And that just happened to be 3 days in a row. And finally today I was like, okay, I don't care what I feel like. I'm just going to make the video no matter what. So that's what I'm doing. So I almost wonder if there's like some spiritual force seems to be trying to like stop me from doing this. So with all of that said, as to my introduction, oh, and by the way, sincere apologies to anyone if you sent me a message and I didn't respond. There was a while when I just kind of got disconnected from the whole computer and I kind of lost touch with some people and stuff. So if anybody like sent me a message, you didn't hear back from me, I sincerely apologize. I'm definitely around. You can, send me an email or reach my phone or whatever. So, okay. With all that being said, man, it's time to get deep with this stuff, and I'll let you decide for yourself what you think of my perspective on it. I don't claim that I understand everything about it or everything I say is true, but I do claim that if you follow me on this stuff and really think about it, this is fascinating because it's going to cause you to see certain stuff in our society very differently. And what you're going to see is that the stuff that's happening in our world right now, there's no way it's accidental. It's intelligent and it's malicious, and it shows an incredible understanding of human nature. It's brilliant. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it's the work of Satan. Satan is known as the deceiver, right? And man, is he good at deception. I never realized how good until the last few weeks when I started really thinking about it, wondering about what is addiction. And I also kept thinking, how does Satan get our whole society to believe things that just seem ridiculous, right? Like one thing's the personal level. He tries to, get you to do something that's wrong or whatever. But he also gets all of society to believe things and agree on it. Like, how does that work? So I started thinking about that. And it's like, how does he hide the truth of things that are just obvious and get everyone? And what was amazing was I started to realize ways you could do it because I just kept thinking about it. And I was like, dude, what if you did this? And then I was like, wait a minute, that looks exactly like what's happening. And man, I realized some stuff about deception that like the things that we think of as deception are really like bad deception. There's ways to use deception that are so ingenious that like you would never detect it, but they're so weird. They don't even seem like they would work. They never occur to you. That's the thing. The really good deception doesn't even seem like at all what you would think deception would be, but that's why it works. Because if you kind of know what deception would look like, you're going to avoid it. But there's types of deception that seem like you would never think that that's a type of deception. It's like, it works really well. But anyway, I got to restrict myself to like one topic here or I'll go on forever. So I wanted to start this all off, laying the groundwork of my little sermon on what addiction really is, how Satan deceives our whole society, and what's happening to everybody in our society. Because if you understand the nature of it, you can really start to see it. You can resist it more. And for people who aren't even believers, people who don't, believe the scripture, the amazing thing about this is just logical right here. This is just reasoning, You don't even have to go to the Bible or say this relies on the Bible. You can just point this out logically, right? About these patterns of deception in our society. If you actually can perceive them, they're pretty strange. You have to have somebody explain it to you. But once you get the idea, you can look for it yourself. And what you're going to see is that the signs of it are all around us. And what you're also going to see is that there's no way it could happen accidentally. There's no way. This pattern that's happening, something is consciously inserting beliefs into our society or getting us to all agree on things that there's no way that we would just happen to agree on. For the simple reason being that if you look at what I'm going to describe here, what you'll essentially see is that many of the problems in our current society are not actually caused by the thing that they're supposedly about. They're caused by what we believe, and they're actually inevitable consequences of having the particular beliefs that we have. But in such a way that it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems as if they're just happening on their own, but they're actually caused by the beliefs we have. And if you look at the beliefs we have, they're actually a perfectly set up group of beliefs to create that thing. If you were to change some of them, the whole thing wouldn't occur. So it's as if they've been engineered to generate this particular problem. But what's amazing is most of them are contained within the apparent solution to the problem. So somehow, in the course of trying to solve various social problems, we've actually come up with what is essentially a perfectly engineered mind virus to generate that problem and perpetuate it in a way that you would never be able to escape from it. But you would think you were fighting against it, when actually that's the thing that creates it and then spreads it around. And if you look at how this is made, this is so intricate if you really start to examine it, that there's no way this happened by accident. Because if you sit back and you start to say, if you were going to design a set of beliefs and a way of operating that would actually do the most damage, and instead of getting rid of the thing, it would create the thing while appearing innocuous, like if you're an evil mastermind, how would you do it? And if you sit there and think of how to do it, and then you look at what our society is as close to an ideal way to do it as I can even imagine. So with all of that said, this is going to take a lot of videos to break this stuff down, but hopefully this is interesting. So I want to start off with a simple topic, which is this. Have you ever heard that our beliefs can create reality? It's a common idea these days. Your beliefs, they generate reality. You can make your own reality. So who is it? Some author said, when you want something, the whole universe conspires to, make it appear. So, is that true? What's going on there? Well, this is the truth about it. I can explain exactly where this comes from. First of all, our beliefs do not create reality. Our beliefs have no direct effect on reality. If you believe that, you're living on a different planet or that you can fly or something, notice that there's no one who can fly, even though you can probably find some people who believe they could fly. No one can. And if your beliefs can create reality, why don't we all just believe that we have everything we want? And why aren't we all living in a happy reality? Why would anyone, believe that they have the life they have compared to what you could have? So it's absurd to think that your beliefs create reality. They don't. Yet, how is it that there seems to be something to that idea though, right? I mean, you can't deny that a lot of people believe it for a reason. A lot of times it kind of seems like they do, What's up with that? Well, the answer is quite simple. Your beliefs do not create reality. However, your free will is extremely consequential. Your free will can, in some ways, create reality, at least within the realm of things that you have choices about. It's that simple. So what do your beliefs have to do with it? Because there's nothing more consequential to your free will in terms of how it will express itself than your beliefs. Your beliefs are literally the thing which constrain and shape your free will into characteristic patterns. Meaning that if you imagine like a big blank piece of paper that represents every possible choice you could make, if we look at any particular person, what we're going to see is they only ever choose a narrow subset of all the possible choices. And what we're also going to see is that's pretty similar over time. Like people don't behave completely differently each day. The stuff people do, they tend to keep doing it. If we were to look at that, what we would see is of all the choices you could have made in your life, there was kind of like this little shape that was what you actually made. Someone else would have a totally different shape. Somebody else would have a different shape. And the question would be, What is determining it? Why is it that of all the possibility, it's like almost like a snowflake? Each person has like a different free will snowflake that's quite stable. It changes a bit, but it doesn't really radically change. What is making it this way? Why, considering you could choose anything? And the answer is your beliefs are. Well, why is that? I mean, couldn't you believe anything but then choose anything? No, you could not. And let me explain why. Really, you can sum it up with a simple question. Do you ever choose to do something which is completely impossible? Well, of course not, right? Do you ever choose to teleport to the store instead of walking there? Do you ever choose not to teleport to the store instead of walking there? No, you never choose that at all, right? Because you can't teleport to the store. So we only choose between the things that we actually can do, right? But what if there's something you can actually do, but you believe you can't do it, that it's impossible? What does that do? Well, you would never try to do it. As far as you know, it's as impossible as teleporting, right? So if you never try to do it, then you would actually just never do it. So wouldn't it basically be impossible? What would the difference be if we looked at one group of people who couldn't do something? Then we looked at another group who only believed they couldn't do it, and we watched them. What would the difference between the two groups be? And the answer is there would be no difference, because neither group would ever even try to do the thing. And without ever trying to do something, it's impossible to do it, regardless of whether you could have done it if you had tried or not. That's irrelevant. So what you have to realize is that the belief that you cannot do something is an extremely powerful belief, precisely because so much of whether you can do something or not actually comes down to your free will. Now, look, there's certain things you could never do no matter what, right? Like you can't fly off into space. But within all the realm of all the things that are physically possible, what constrains whether or not you can do something basically comes down to simply whether you do it or not. And that's constrained greatly by whether you believe you can do it or not. So this belief that you can't do something, since it causes you to cease ever trying to do the thing, while not even being aware that you're making that choice. From your perspective, if you start to believe you can't do something, it's not as if your choices have suddenly become limited. From your perspective, you're still free to choose anything you could do, right? So it's not even taken away on a conscious level, but subconsciously, it's impossible. So you just, it's never even presented to your conscious mind. So the first thing you have to understand is that believing that you cannot do something has a tangible effect on you immediately. The effect it has is it actually makes it impossible to do the thing. It actually takes away your ability. So the belief that something is impossible has the effect of actually disabling your ability to do that thing, assuming that you actually could have done it, right? If it was something that was, if you believe you can't fly, then nothing's changed. But if something that you actually could have done, but for some reason you think, you know what, I can't do that, that's impossible, instantly the belief actually disables you. And as long as you believe it, you are disabled. If for some reason you cease believing it, then suddenly you'll have the ability again. But here's where we look at it deeper. That's not the only effect that this belief has. The other thing about this belief is that it's a self-proving belief. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the effect of the belief, the effect of believing it, which is that you lose the ability to do something, is indistinguishable from evidence that the belief is true, right? So if you believe that something's impossible for you, the evidence would be that you can't do it. But this belief creates that. It has the effect of making it so you can't do it. So if you start to believe it, you won't be able to do it, which to you will appear exactly as evidence that the belief is true. So anyone who starts to believe this belief will then see evidence all around them that it's true. So it's a self-proving belief because it generates evidence for itself. Actually, what it generates is just an effect, but since that looks identical to the evidence that it's true, you can't tell them apart. So for all intents and purposes, suddenly you see every evidence in your life that the belief is correct, right? And it also does this in other ways. Like, for example, if you believe the belief over a period of time, so over a period of time, you don't do the thing. And then you start to think to yourself, man, it's been all these years and I've never been able to do it even once. I mean, that just shows the belief is true. Of course, what's really happened is you've never tried to do it even once, but it doesn't seem like that to you because you don't perceive yourself as even having a choice, or you might even think, man, I wish so much I could do this thing. I've suffered so much because I can't. I feel so bad about it. And I still haven't even been able to do it once. right? It's that really, man, there's no doubt. If I could have done it, I would have. But of course, you're failing to see that the actual belief that you can't is the only thing that stopped you. So that's why it's dangerous. And of course, for that reason, it's also a self-perpetuating belief because it has this other characteristic, which is that not only does it generate evidence that it's true, it also hides the evidence that it's not true. Because think about it, what would be the only way that you could see the evidence that the belief is false? Well, it'd be if you just did the thing. But the belief itself makes that impossible. So not only does it generate evidence that it's true, it erases all the evidence that it's false merely by believing it, right? So it's self-perpetuating, it's self-proving, it has the effect of making the thing actually be true. So it's a very unusual belief in that sense. This is just by believing it. But that's not even the worst thing about it. I haven't even told you the worst characteristic of it. The worst characteristic of it is that you don't even have to believe it. What do I mean? I mean, if you just seriously consider that it could be true, it generates a feedback loop. This is nuts, right? You don't even have to believe it. You could think like someone could tell you, hey, you can't do that thing. And you're like, what do you mean? Of course I can. And they're like, nah, you actually really can't. Haven't you looked closely? It's actually impossible for you. And you're like, that's ridiculous. And they're like, oh, really? Maybe you should take a closer look. They tell you like, you can't really go jogging. I mean, it seems like you can, but actually it's just an illusion. You really can't. Or something. You're like, I go jogging sometimes. They're like, oh, really? You ever do it? You ever really pay attention to your ability to do it? And you're like, that's ridiculous. Of course I can do it. But now you're like, and this person tells you something about how like it might seem like you can do it, but actually you can't, and you're like, that's crazy. So now you're like, of course I can, right? So now you start to go jogging, but now what are you doing? You're starting to like look for a sign that you can't actually, jog. You're like, I seem to be jogging, right? And so now what happens? Well, naturally, whenever you're doing something, the output isn't exactly consistent. So you're going to be like jogging, but a moment's going to come when you just, slow down a little bit, not consciously, when you just do it a little bit less, because it's just a normal variation. If you were to look at anything you're doing, even though you intend to do it continually, it kind of, wavers a little bit, but normally you don't notice because it doesn't really mean anything. But now that you're like looking, suddenly your output goes down. Suddenly you're like not jogging as much and you're like, wait a minute, Judah. And suddenly you perceive it as if your ability just went down, right? Like you can't jog as much. That's how you perceive it when it drops. You think my ability just diminished. Now, because you think your ability just diminished, you now subconsciously don't try to do it any more than that level. So it your output drops a little bit, but instead of thinking that means nothing, in which case it would probably, waver, it goes down and suddenly you're like, oh my God, my ability just went down. I can't jog quite as fast, like as if you just suddenly lost the ability to. So now, subconsciously, your brain thinks that you can't do it anymore. So you just don't try to do it any more than that. You're like, oh my God, now I can only do it this much. Now the process repeats. Oh, it went down again. So it creates this feedback loop that from your perspective, seems as if the whole time you're just trying to do it as much as you can. It seems like you haven't made any choices. You're just like, okay, I'm doing it. And it suddenly seems as if your ability just is going down. And you're like, oh my God, something's stopping me from doing this. Because from your perspective, you're choosing the same thing the whole time. But of course, what really happens is that before you make a conscious choice, you actually make other choices. Because when you look at a situation, to even know what your choices are, you have to figure out what's actually possible, right? You don't ever choose between things that are possible and impossible. You only ever choose between what's possible. But so how do you know that? Well, because on some unconscious level, your brain looks at all the things you could do and tries to figure out, you couldn't do this. You couldn't really do this. Okay, this is the subset of things that are actually possible. And then that's what your conscious mind is aware of. And what that's obviously determined by is what you believe, right? So in this case, when your output drops a little bit, your subconscious mind suddenly thinks that and you think my output dropped. So your subconscious mind suddenly redraws the boundaries of what's possible. It's so there's no option to go above that. So it drops it. So now consciously, you're still choosing the option to run as much as you can, but you don't realize that the boundary's been a little bit redrawn. So what this belief is actually doing, what's fascinating about it, is that it's actually making some of your own choices invisible to you. That's how it actually works. That's how it takes away your ability, is that it actually blinds you to certain choices that you're making. So from your perspective, you're not consciously making any choices. because it's actually tricking you into misinterpreting what's happening. And from your perspective, it seems like you're just losing the ability to do something. Whereas in actuality, you're just not trying to do certain levels of things. And that's not consciously perceptible. So by hiding your own choices from you, it seems as if you actually can't do the thing, but you don't realize that you're choosing not to. So anyway, that's why this belief is so dangerous. It can create this feedback loop where you're looking at it. And it's really not any different than if I was to say like, hey, do you ever notice that when you talk to people, they just think you're kind of a weirdo? I mean, at first it seems like they like you, but then you see this little look and you start to realize that they probably don't even like talking to you at all. You're probably making them really uncomfortable. I mean, they can, did you ever notice that? And at first you're like, nah, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? And you're like, yeah, it's so sad. You won't admit it, will you? And you're just like, what do you mean? And then you go out and talk to some people, and then you notice some little thing about them and you start to think like, am I making them uncomfortable? And you start to get a little tense. And then they kind of notice that and they're sort of like, it's a little tense. And then you're sort of like, oh man, I think I might be making them uncomfortable. And then you get more uncomfortable. And then it gets a little bit awkward. And then you think like, dude, and then they start to actually feel a little weird. And then you're like, oh man, they're definitely feeling weird. I am making them uncomfortable. And so the whole thing becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for the simple reason that the reason that these beliefs about yourself do this is because of your free will. Because in reality, the thing that the belief is claiming is not actually fixed. It's not actually defined. In reality, can you do this or can't you do it? Well, if you do it, then you can do it. If you don't, then you don't. But if you act as if it's something that's determined outside of you, then it starts to interact with your free will in a way that you stop noticing that you're actually deciding the thing, that it's actually in a constant state of flux. And you start to think that it has some external thing. And so that's how it's kind of blinding you to your own choice. Because these kind of beliefs aren't necessarily true with everything else, but with stuff that directly interacts with your free will, they are. So anyway, that's a little bit about how the belief that you can't do something actually takes away your ability to do it, hides it from you, and it's very hard to realize that. And interestingly enough, not only is it self-proving if you believe it, but if you don't believe it, that's also self-proving. So if someone says, man, you can't do this thing. And you're like, that's ridiculous. I'll go do it now. And you go out and you do it. Oh, you can do it. And you're like, that belief was wrong. So, and if you think about it, how do you acquire the ability to do something that you can't do, right? Like recently I've been singing a lot. So before I couldn't sing at all. Now I can sing a bit. How am I gaining an ability? How am I making something possible? Well, all you really do is you essentially decide that we say, I'm going to learn this. But what you're really deciding is you decide to believe that in the future, you will be able to do this. And then you start doing it, even though you can't and you fail, you decide that in the future, I'll be able to. And you keep repeating that. And over time, you actually then become able to. So this belief, just like the belief that you can't do something takes away your ability to do it, the belief that you can do something is actually what you have to use to be able to gain the ability to do it. So all of this, it might seem obvious or it might not, or why is it consequential? Okay, so I'll keep doing the video. Why not? All right, so I want to tell you guys about something called learned helplessness, which is a direct example of how this actually happens in practice. How this isn't just some theoretical thing, but it's very powerful. Learned helplessness is a concept in psychology, which basically I think it was demonstrated in the 60s by like Seligman. And basically what they show is that if you take various dogs and you like electrocute them or something, shock them, when they're like in a certain part of the cage, then what they'll normally do is they'll like move away so that they stop getting shocked. That's typical behavior. However, if you take some of the dogs and you put them in the cage in such a way that they're shocked, but no matter where they move, they just keep getting shocked, then for a while they keep fighting it and they keep trying to escape. Eventually they seem to realize that they can't avoid it. And at that point, they just lay down and just start absorbing the shocks and they don't resist it. If you then take those dogs and put them into a cage where all they have to do is move, to get away from the shocks, and you put in some other dogs, and then you start shocking them, the other dogs will just move away. But the dogs who have been conditioned with the learned helplessness will just lay there and get shocked, even though all they have to do is just move and they can stop it. They just won't. They'll just lay there. They see the other dogs move and they won't move. And at this point, you can try to threaten them. You can try to tempt them. You can try to do anything to get them to move away from the shocks, and they won't. They'll just keep taking the shocks. And they've been conditioned with what's called learned helplessness, which is really just based on this belief that it's impossible for you to do something. Because that's what you've essentially taught the dogs by putting them in that environment where they keep getting shocked. And you have to understand, it's not that the dogs don't care if they're being shocked. It's not that they want to be shocked. It's not that they're not trying. It's that they don't believe they can do it. You have to understand this because this is very crucial. From their perspective, they definitely don't want to get shocked. They definitely haven't just, decided that that doesn't matter. They definitely don't like it. And it's not that they're not trying to avoid it, right? Like as if they could try, but they just don't want to try or something. No, from their perspective, it's literally impossible. And so they just are not trying to do something that's literally impossible. No one ever tries to do anything that's literally impossible, right? They just don't know. They've essentially been deceived. They just don't understand the situation. And the only way to get them out of it or to break the learned helplessness is, interestingly enough, if you actually take the dogs and you like move their legs and like move them through the motions that they would have to do to get away from the thing, and then you move them away and they stop getting shocked. I think you have to do that a few times, and suddenly they realize like that they actually can get away from it, and then they start getting up on their own and moving away from it. So this concept is very important to understand because so much of our society has been conditioned with this. We've all been conditioned with this. They're using this to destroy us. Generation Z, it's their characteristic. Learned helplessness. You ever heard these days how like men, they're not even forming relationships. They don't even attempt to get women, right? That's weird. Doesn't every guy want that? They're not even trying. Generation Z, they're not even trying to do this. People don't even expect to have this anymore. It's learned helplessness. It's when you won't even try to do something, even if you probably could. It's like you just give it up as an option. And this is now being deployed against our whole society. Everybody is like acquiring this. And it makes so much sense because if you wanted to control society or have people be malleable, well, this would be a great thing to induce in them. And in fact, the U.S. government, during the war on terrorism, paid a bunch of psychologists from some university to design a regimen of treatment that would be the optimal regimen to induce learned helplessness in, I forget if it was the Guantanamo detainees or something like that. And they did, because obviously the government understood we want to produce this effect because it's very useful to us for controlling people and breaking them down and so on. And my personal belief is that as to this thing that's kind of happening to everyone, suddenly it's as if we're all acquiring a bit more of this learned helplessness, which really is like a subtle, essentially an unconscious belief, because with the learned helplessness, you're not aware that it's a choice at all. It doesn't seem like you've made any different choices. It seems like you're doing everything you've always done, but it appears to you as if suddenly you just can't do certain things. Because on a deep level, you've actually started to believe they're impossible in a way that you're not really consciously aware. And so I believe that there are factors occurring in our society that are causing this to increase in everybody. And the result of it is that things which require willpower, this is my theory, things that require willpower, as the learned helplessness kind of increases, it's like it diminishes those things. You see the effect particularly in those things. Because a lot of stuff, like doing the same thing you do every day, doesn't take a lot of willpower to do. It's kind of automatic. But other things do require continual willpower. And my theory is that within those areas, as this increases, you notice it there first. It's like, oh, that's weird. I'm not doing this as much. So on a deeper level, I basically believe that evil is just taking over the earth right now. Look, we're close. I don't know how close, but like evil is like whatever barriers there were to them, they have so much momentum. They're just rolling through it out. They have consolidated their power. The people that really run this world behind the scenes, like they are just, their grip on the earth is just so complete. And I think that this thing with a learned helplessness is just increasing, in my opinion, in everyone. You can see it in society. People don't have as much energy. They're kind of like, their attention's kind of messed up. Like, see, the symptoms of it are appearing. So people can't really concentrate. There's stuff that they like normally like to do. People just don't do it as much. There's not really as many like parties. Like people don't really make new friends as much. You don't really quite stay in touch with your friends. It's like all these things that you could do and you kind of want to, but you just sort of don't do them, you know? And meanwhile, all of the addictions, which is everything from drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and your phones and staring at YouTube and ordering pizzas and like all that stuff is like everybody's there. It's like it's all increasing, you know? it's like all that stuff is going up as your willpower is kind of weakened and you're in this state of persistent kind of unhappiness, persistent emotional pain. You're sort of just naturally looking for something to kind of increase your mood a little, because that's the natural reaction when you're in this kind of state of continual sort of pain that you're just sort of adapted to. That's when the addictions appear. You're looking for some kind of relief from just this thing that's like not right. I think that this is not happening by accident. I don't know how it's happening. I don't know if it's on a spiritual level, if they actually have some ways to induce it that we don't realize. I'm sure they do, because I know they've done a lot of research on it. So I'm sure they know all kinds of ways to induce it in people. And I also think it's just a result of what's happening in the world with the news stories, how everything's going. I mean, everything is just like, everything is falling apart, man. Our social bonds between each other are disintegrating. This stuff is all happening at this steady drip, drip, drip rate, and it's just adding up and it's affecting everybody. And as people who are saved, who know the Lord Jesus Christ, we're very fortunate that we can actually see the truth of it. Because the truth of it is that behind the world's governments is this supranational deep state, but behind them is Satan. Satan is very real. There's no doubt about that. And if you start to look deep into how exactly they're inducing all of this malaise, all these problems in our society, what you see is that it's very, it's brilliant the way that it's set up. There are all kinds of beliefs in our society, ways that people think, which seem innocuous, and you never really think about them. And if I point them out, you're going to be like, yeah, of course, people believe that. But if you start to look at it deeply, what you'll start to see is actually, this is not an ordinary belief. This has weird features. This is like a belief designed to create the thing that it says it's going against. And it also hides itself because of this. And I've been examining this stuff recently, and I'm like, man, there's deception going on in our society at a level that we don't even realize. We have these structures of belief that don't make any sense. How would we create this? But they seem normal, and we all accept them. And the effect they have is completely malicious. Completely malicious. Whatever created these beliefs, they didn't appear organically. People didn't just believe them. Something created these beliefs intentionally as a design in order to induce psychological harm and trap people in certain states of suffering. And whatever did clearly understands human psychology at a very deep level. Like, might sound like a crazy claim. I mean, people watching this video probably get me because Satan's real. But what's interesting is how easily you can actually demonstrate it. That's another weird thing, is if you actually look at a lot of the beliefs in our society, it's not even hard to show why, like, does this make any sense? You know, I won't go off too much into it, but like I just explained how the belief that you can't do something, how it has all these effects, and how there's a well-known effect in psychology, learned helplessness, that is entirely based on essentially teaching people that belief. You know, with the dogs, you would put them in a certain situation. And I won't go into it too much now because I don't want to go on and on in this video. I have plenty more coming soon. But just to throw out some examples just for the end of the video, you know, like, how is it that, you know, speaking of addictions, you know, what if you have some addiction or some problem with something? There's something and you just do too much of it. You know you shouldn't, but you just keep doing too much. You know, maybe you've gotten to a bad habit, or what is it, you know? Well, how would you get better at that thing? If there's something and you're just doing too much of it and it's creating problems, you know, what should you do about it? Well, the first thing you'd have to realize is you could never stop doing too much of it. That would be impossible. You know, you're powerless over it. You know, if you thought you could do less of it, well, that would be the problem. That'd be crazy. Someone like you doing less of it, that was the problem all the whole time. Believing that you had any power, believing that it was possible to do, that would be the problem. The whole reason that you couldn't do it, that you couldn't moderate your addiction, was that you had believed that you could. But if you accepted the truth that you never could, that would be the only way to make the problem better. Does that make sense to anyone? Obviously, what I'm describing is the central idea of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is that the first step in dealing with your problem is to accept your complete powerlessness, to accept your total inability to ever do the thing, which is the only thing that would ever solve the problem. That's interesting. Doesn't that seem a little weird, right? Like, maybe it doesn't, because that's just what we all believe. I mean, isn't that the thing you have to do when you're an alcoholic, right? But isn't it strange that if you just look at it for a minute, that apparently the first thing you have to do is stop making any effort to do the thing which would really be the obvious solution, which is, to work at it, put in effort, to drink less, moderate your drinking, make an effort, Wouldn't that be the obvious solution if you drink too much? Well, no, because the thing is, alcoholics, there's a special group that they could never do that, and you would have to convince them that they could never do it. But how's that different from someone who's overweight who's like, yeah, maybe I'll go to the gym. And you're like, you could never go to the gym. You're overweight. You would never go to the gym. But what if they start to a little? Well, AA might tell you, if you start to seem to control it, well, that's actually a sign that that's what alcoholics always try to do. And then they fail, so if it seemed like it was getting in control, watch out, because then it would go out of control. Right. And anyway, I won't go into the whole routine here because, dude, a lot of it is actually just pure comedy. If you really sit back and look at it, you're like, wait a minute, why do we do this? But long story short, isn't it strange how if we just showed how a belief you can't do something stops you from being able to do it? And yet the central idea of our treatment of addiction programs is to drive that belief into people, because apparently that's the way out of it. And apparently the thing that's wrong with them is that they believe they can do something. And so I guess I don't want to make the video too long here, but look at Satan's pattern. Look at how he always operates. He uses so much of the truth in his deceptions. He doesn't tell you something totally false. Oh no, he tells you something that's almost entirely true, but he switches a little key piece and he gives it to you. And because it has so much of the truth, you start to believe it. And when you check it, wow, it checks out. This is true. And you don't notice this little tiny piece that's just altered. But it's not just any little tiny piece. It's a very specific tiny piece. Because if you were to have something that's mostly true, but something's wrong, probably be a random thing. But Satan makes the part of it that's wrong not just random, but a critical part, a crucial part that has the effect of flipping the entire effect around. So that instead of, for example, if he tells you the truth about a problem, it's all true except for one part, which completely reverses it, so much so that if you act on that, thinking you understand the problem, you'll actually make it much worse instead of solving it. And look, for example, in this case, look at, like what AA says, for example, about addictions. It says, you know what? You got to start by looking at your beliefs, because your beliefs are very consequential. Totally true. It says, you know what? You're going to have to change some of your core beliefs, because it could be that there's actually a belief, that's actually causing this problem, Totally true, right? It says, yeah, you're going to have to flip something around here. Yep. And what it is, the problem is you believed that something that was possible was actually impossible. And you got to change that, and that's what's created the whole problem. Jink, flipped around. Because in reality, if you think about it, what is the effect of the opposite of this? What if you believe you can do something that it turns out you can't actually do? Does that ever create a problem? What if you believe you could become an NBA player, right? And it turns out in the end that you actually can't. Well, what's the effect going to be? Well, you'd probably play a lot of basketball and you get a lot better, right? In the end, you don't make it to the NBA, but is that bad? I mean, doesn't it still make you a better basketball player? In fact, as I said, doesn't every ability, everything you acquire and learn, require the belief that you can do it? Even when you initially can't, even when you keep failing. When is it ever a problem that people have too much of that belief, that they have too much perseverance? They're too driven, right? They just believe that they can do something. And, even if you don't achieve it, wouldn't you still get closer and closer to it, right? However, this belief that you can't do something would destroy your attempts to do anything. Because if you're trying to do anything and you're going to fail over and over, because that's normal. It's the only way to do anything is to first fail at it. The only way to get better at something you can't do is to fail at it repeatedly, right? And so you're going to have to tolerate that. If at any point you decide that the fact that you failed this particular time at whatever it was means that it's impossible for you to do the thing, as a result, you stop trying, that's literally the worst possible thing you could do in terms of your outcome. If you want to make your outcome as bad as possible at any moment, what you should do is just completely stop trying. So if at any point you're like, actually, it's impossible, zinc, all your progress will stop. right? So that belief is incredibly consequential. And yet, how is it that we have this thing that treats addictions that basically says that what you have to do is adopt that belief because not having that belief would create a problem? After all, you wouldn't want to think things are possible that aren't, but that's completely flipped around from reality. That's all that is true about the belief is powerful and da da da, and your beliefs affect things, and you have to face the truth of it. All that true. But then the whole thing about what the belief you have to change is, it's been reversed from how you would have to change it to the thing that creates the problem. And somehow that's seen as what gets you out of the problem, but that doesn't make any sense. That's bizarre. And then we hear things like, insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And that seems like it makes sense. You wouldn't want to keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I mean, that'd be pretty much a waste of time. Except that that's literally how you do anything. There's literally no skill you can acquire. There's no one who got good at anything without doing the same thing over and over and over and over. Tom Brady was just some guy throwing a football and he was too skinny, but man, he did the same thing over and over and expected different results. And look at that. Suddenly he got different results. And nobody ever thought that that was insane. So if suddenly you accept this idea, then you're essentially accepting that anything that you can't already do, it will be impossible for you to do. Very strange idea. It seems like the kind of idea you would want to get people to believe if you wanted to trap them forever and never let them improve. You'd have to tell them, well, the first thing is, you definitely would never want to keep trying if you were failing, because that would be the worst thing you could do. If you really wanted to get better, you would have to just stop trying. That'd be the only way for things to ever get better. That's weird. What's funny though is, dude, there's tons of things in our society like this. Things that if you think about them, actually seem like what you would want to do or convince people if you were trying to make everything as bad as possible. And like, how did we come up with this? And then it kind of makes sense why our society's getting so bad and why everyone's getting so lonely and why everything's breaking down. Even though people don't want that, why is it happening? How is it that everyone's getting lonely and disconnected and nothing is what people want? When couldn't they just connect more? Why don't people just connect to each other? Like, why don't they just choose not to do what they're doing? Why don't people just choose not to look at their phone so much? What you'll see is a lot of it actually has to do with our most basic beliefs are unwittingly locking us into it. And they're engineered to do that in a way that's almost beautiful in an abstract sense. Not that it's actually good. But anyway, guys, okay, well, that's quite a bit there. So I just wanted to get out here and share some of those ideas. And there's a lot more coming about satanic deception and the ways that it actually works and how you can see it in our society. But I guess I'd just like to say here, to end on the theme of this video about the learned helplessness, look, whatever you're going through personally, we're all going through different things. And I think right now we're going through more stuff than usual. Whatever you're going through personally, my advice to you about it is, regardless of whatever actions you're taking with it, maintain positive beliefs about it. Maintain an optimistic outlook about it, because that is so crucial. That will affect you more than you realize. I'm not saying, don't think that it's a problem or something like that, but what I'm saying is, however it's going, tell yourself, what, I got this. This is happening. Look at your progress at it. Keep a positive outlook. Stay upbeat with it. Because if you don't do that, that has a catastrophic effect on whatever the situation is. And there's basically no situation that by feeling worse about it, it would actually make the situation better. Even if the situation is totally terrible, it still makes sense to just say, what, I got this. Because that's the best, that would create the best possible outcome, right? Like, that's the funny thing about it, is the thing which is supposedly so bad within addictions, which is you would never want to be in denial or not admit how bad it was, because that would have a catastrophic effect. Actually, that's not true at all, because a lot of times, even if you're in a terrible situation, being like, oh, this situation's terrible doesn't actually improve it. But if you say, what, I'm going to look back at this one day, this is nothing. Oftentimes that is literally the best thing you can do, even if it seems insane because of the way it causes you to make certain choices. That's oftentimes your best hope of getting out of it. So whatever the situation is, whatever you're struggling with, I encourage you to look at how important your beliefs about it are and keep choosing to have beliefs that it is possible, that you can do it, that you will do it, that you are doing it, that whatever little setback you had doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean anything. You're just learning it. That's how you learn anything. In my life, I learned to play flamenco guitar, for example. That's been really hard. I'm still learning it. But, I failed at that constantly and terribly for years. And I kept playing it and I kept playing it. And I never thought, oh, I can't play it. I just thought, oh, I'm going to play more hours now. And I even maybe played a little too much and went a little nuts for a while. But these days, I can actually play so many of those skills and pieces that for years I would fail. Now I can actually play them. Why? Because I just kept playing them even when I couldn't play them. And I never at any point believed that I was just someone who my identity was just that I couldn't do it. I kept saying, well, I'm going to play more. And I always believed, well, eventually I'll play them. It's only a matter of time. And you know what? Now I can do it. And I think that in life, that's how you get any meaningful thing is you got to be persistent and you got to believe. You got to believe. If your beliefs start to drop, that's basically what destroys you. And right now in our society, that's kind of happening to everyone. Everybody's kind of giving up. Everybody's kind of being drained. Everybody's kind of just not trying. It's happening. And I think the best thing we can do now is to fight against that. Fight against it. Refuse to look at it negatively. You know what? Even if something you have an addiction or this or that, guess what? Everyone does. It's happening to everyone on different levels, sure. Everyone has some kind of addiction. Everyone has some problem. Nothing's ideal. But that doesn't mean you have to give up. It doesn't mean you have to believe bad things about yourself or feel bad about yourself. And it doesn't mean you have to stop doing things for God, doing things to help others, telling people about Jesus, just being kind, just functioning. Just because you might have some issue or some problem, it's easy to think like, well, I guess I can't, do this because of this issue. Until I fix this issue, I can't do other things. And that's just an example of this type of thinking that something's impossible, making it impossible. I had this plan that I got to start sleeping at this time and I got to start eating like this and not doing this and doing this. And once I have everything perfect, well, then I'll start making the videos again. And if I had kept believing that, probably just more and more time would go by and I wouldn't make the videos. And I would think, well, I still don't have this. Maybe it would even get worse and who knows. But I just decided, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and do them now. And now I've made a video. It's almost an hour. It's been a lot of fun. And I have so many more things to tell you guys about. But anyway, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. And yeah, it's great to be back. Sorry I was gone for so long. And yeah, let's work for the Lord Jesus Christ. These are the end times. We're at the edge. Let's encourage. Let's fight. Let's stay strong. All this stuff that's happening in society, guess what? It's temporary. We'll be with God eternally. Who cares if these evil people run the world? Their time is going to be very short. And we know where we'll be for eternity. We know who we'll be with. We'll be with each other. Our sufferings here are momentary. This will be gone in the blink of an eye. So let's do everything we can to do the right thing, to help each other, to pick ourselves up, to get rid of our false beliefs, to know the truth. And everything we do, we will be rewarded with in eternity. And whatever sufferings we have, next thing we know it, we're going to be with God in a completely different world. And it's going to be totally different. And all this stuff will just be a memory. And everything that we did and fought in this world to make things better, everyone we could wake up, everything we did for the truth, we're going to be so glad we did it. And we're probably going to wish we had done even more. So let's do it, however imperfect it might be and however imperfect we are. Let's just get up and do it anyway. Because you know what? Why not? It's the beliefs that are imprisoning us. That we're weak, we can't do it, this and that, whatever. Let's just decide that's not true. And let's just do it anyway. We got the strength of God and the Holy Spirit with us. So this is a better time than ever to try to help other people, to do what we can, to just express ourselves, to be genuine in a world where everything's fake and no one seems to acknowledge the truth, but deep down everyone knows it. Dude, let's just put the truth everywhere, man. I'm going to start making videos about everything I can perceive. And I don't even care if someone thinks this or that or whatever, dude. Let's just say the truth. Let's get it out there. Let's work. Let's work for the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, everyone. Well, it's great to be back, and I have a lot more to come soon. Oh, and if anyone wants prayers, let me know. And yeah, that's about everything I have to share with you tonight. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. All right, I love you guys. May the Lord Jesus Christ be with each and every one of you, and see you soon in the clouds.